How quickly have you noped out of a job? Why? Story 1. 3 days after my 2-week training, I was supposed to start as a seasonal temp worker for a national propane company. My job was to take calls off hours for customers who wanted refills and to act as a messenger service, passing on their contact information to their local store when it opened the next day. I thought it would be a breeze. When I got to the office, I was surprised to learn that I was also expected to be a dispatcher for the drivers and the first point of contact for all emergency situations. These were things that I had never been briefed on in training. On my first shift, I had a field call from a local police officer who was on the scene of a horrific propane truck crash. I had to wake up the district manager in the middle of the night to tell him his worker died and the overturned truck was blocking several lanes of the freeway. The police were trying to reach him, but he had not yet answered his phone. That was just the beginning. If a customer smelled garlic and eggs in their house, I got the call. If a CO detector was going off, I got the call. Customers would call me instead of 911 for some reason. I had zero interest in being an underpaid, untrained emergency dispatcher. It's the only job I've ever quit without giving 2 weeks' notice. I was nice enough to finish out my shift on the 3rd day, but that was it. If that guy stayed at that job, I wouldn't be surprised if he called 911 on himself one day and be like, "Help, I'm having a burnout." Story 2. Many years ago, I worked as a line cook at a popular sports bar. On my first day, I was trained by a guy who didn't speak English for 2 hours. This wasn't a big deal, as you mostly learn in a kitchen by observing others. However, the owner came back and said she was scheduling me to be alone the next day, which was Super Bowl Sunday. I noped out of there so fast. I left then and there. My friend had a similar experience. Here's what she told me. I worked as a line cook in college because I enjoyed cooking and it was a decent job. I didn't want to work at chain restaurants anymore, so I applied at a local burger joint that made burgers from grass-fed beef from their family farm. It seemed like a cool idea. I shadowed someone on my first day, and they said they would start me on the bun or fryer station and then see if they could train me on the grill. This sounded fair. On my next shift, I showed up and the kitchen was fully staffed. The manager on duty, who wasn't there the previous day, told me I would be running the register, the only register for the whole restaurant, with no training. I simply said no thanks and left. Story 3. I went to an office for an interview for an administrative position. After the interview, they told me to get in a van and do the next part of the process. Turned out, we drove an hour away so I could shadow one of their door-to-door salespeople. They would ask residents to go into their basement to check their water heaters to see if they were eligible to replacement with their company's own. I felt uncomfortable about this and pretty annoyed that my whole day was gone doing it. The worst part was that the girl I was shadowing spent half the day sitting around in the truck reading magazines and waiting for people to come home from work. I asked her questions about the job, but she got defensive and said she decided who got the job. I replied that I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it, but she kept insisting that she was the one who decided. I don't think she understood that I meant I didn't want to do the job at all. Yeah, door-to-door sales are so weird, and it's probably why people are hesitant to answer their doors, because it goes like, "Hi, you don't know me, but can you take me to your basement?" Story 4. Many years ago, I was managing a fast food restaurant for a local franchise. Shortly before lunch, one of my employees received a phone call that their grandmother had been taken to the hospital with a possible heart attack. The employee lived with their grandmother, and their parents were not in the picture. I told the employee to go to the hospital and that I would find someone to cover their shift. About 15 minutes later, my district manager showed up and asked why I was short-staffed. Fast food restaurants run on razor-thin margins, so one missing employee is easily noticed. I told him what had happened and that the employee was on their way to the hospital. His response was, "What are they going to do? Save her? They're not doctors. We have a business to run." That was the last straw for me with that company. It was part of a larger pattern of that attitude, and I refused to treat employees like that. I gave my notice shortly after and moved to a better job. To those of you with similar roles, I'm truly sorry you experienced that. People deserve to be treated with respect, no matter their position. Be kind to each other, y'all. Shoot, that district manager must have sold his soul to the corporate demon. If I were there, I'd snap back with, So you're saying I should just leave my grandma so we can keep flipping burgers? Sounds like a real lousy deal. And then I'd peace out. Story 5. Back in college, I used to work part-time as a nanny. One summer, I scored this really sweet 40-hour per job week, Monday to Friday, looking after a baby and a toddler. I was pretty excited about the money I'd be raking in with all those hours. But here's the deal. The dad, who was unemployed, was going to be home with me. Supposedly, he was on the job hunt. And I was on kid duty while the wife was at work. But seriously, in just the first week, around day 2 or 3, he started dropping hints about his marriage woes. He casually mentioned how his wife prefers the couch as a sleeping spot. The next day, he suggested I try out his swanky new massage chair. I hesitantly agreed, and there I am, reclining on his vibrating contraption, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that's nice. Great. Thanks." Then, out of the blue, he offered to give me a real massage sometime and even suggested I return the favor. By the time Friday afternoon rolled around, I couldn't take it anymore. I spilled the tea to my parents, I was staying with them for the summer, and my mom gave the guy a piece of her mind, telling him I wouldn't be coming back next Monday, or ever for that matter. In response, he had the nerve to text me saying he was disappointed in me, and I can't help but feel for his poor wife. Story 6. It was my first day working for a family-owned business that had recently purchased fiber optic installation equipment. They had transitioned from real estate after reading an article in Entrepreneur's magazine that claimed the industry averaged $1 million in annual gross revenue. They pulled their teenage sons out of school to work as laborers, and the mother and father planned to lead separate crews. I was their first hired employee. As I was setting up my bore path, the mother informed me that we didn't need to expose an electrical line. We could simply drill a few feet underneath it. I explained that this was a reckless and dangerous practice. Her husband then approached me and demanded to fight me for insulting his wife. 30 seconds into his trade, their sons accidentally drilled directly into the electrical line, causing a transformer explosion. As I walked away, the father switched from wanting to fight me to chasing his son around a retention pond. The mother begged me not to leave, but I refused. This was clearly an illegal operation, especially with underage workers involved. Greed was their motivation. It was 1997, and the younger son told me he would own a Ferrari F40 in 5 years. The father looked like a librarian, the opposite of a construction worker. He and his wife wore golf shirt uniforms with ridiculous stiff collars. Their equipment was brand new, including the semi-truck they used to haul the drill equipment. Their logo was stamped on everything. Just before the argument, I had asked for a shovel to dig around the electrical line. The mother explained that they had broken 6 shovels in 3 days, which is common for people unfamiliar with digging. They only had 1 shovel left, and the husband was using it. 1 shovel for 2 crews. The older son was operating his father's machine. When the father came over to yell at me, the son kept drilling. I checked with the equipment provider a year or so later. They were the ones who had put me in touch with the family. The provider said that they had thrown in the towel after about 6 months. Many people got rich installing fiber in the late 1990s, but almost all of them lost their money when they expanded too quickly and the telecom companies no longer needed any more lines. Many of my friends and coworkers went bankrupt chasing the dream. Story 7. It was a shop that specialized in repairing train suspension hydraulics. Many of the workers were missing at least a part of a finger, including one maintenance worker who was missing 4 on one hand and half on the other. Half the workers were baked, and the guy training me stormed out halfway through the second day. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to get out of here now. I can imagine the daily conversation among the workers going something like this. How is work? Great. I even got a nickname, 10 Fingers. The old 10 fingers I've lost. And then the much-awaited announcement, this quarter you guys have really achieved a lot for the company and surpassed our expectations. Just a reminder, we will be having to lay off some more people soon. Peace out. I'll find something else before you make me leave. Man, losing digits on the job is not my idea of a good time. We're not Yakuza or John Wick. It's really better to just dip out of that job before you lose something. Want a job that respects you as a human being and not a cog in the machine? Then give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. Story 8. I found out that the educational assistance they advertised was only for full-time employees, and they defined full-time as at least 40 hours per week. They also made it impossible for anyone to qualify for assistance by keeping them from ever working 40 hours per week. None of this was mentioned in the advertisement, and the people I interviewed assured me, a college student, that I would qualify for the benefits if I worked 21 hours per week. Luckily, I read my contract before signing it and called them out on their lie. Don't lie to your employees, especially during an interview about something that can be easily disproven. If you're willing to lie about this, what else are you willing to lie about? By the way, I did their training before being offered my contract, so I count it as having worked there. Story 9. My worst job experience was when I was in high school and working at Blockbuster. I was helping the manager stock shelves before the store opened when my mom called me to say that my dad was having a heart attack and that she was panicking while waiting for the ambulance. I asked my manager if I could leave to help my mom, but he said no. She stressed how important it was to get the shelves stocked and that I could only leave if I found someone to cover for me. I was stunned. My house was a 3-minute walk from the store, and I would only be gone for 10 minutes at most. I took off my name tag and slammed it on the counter. I never went back. My dad survived the heart attack and was in the hospital for a few days. I'm grateful that he's okay, but I'm still furious at the Blockbuster manager for putting a job ahead of my family. Story 10. My first worst job experience was when I was working as a bagger at a grocery store, and my boyfriend at the time was hospitalized due to heart problems. I was still in high school and didn't need the income, so I asked the front-end manager if I could have my phone on vibrate and step into the back room to take a call if something bad happened. She told me no, and that she would be more comfortable if I turned my phone off and put it in an employee locker. I was stunned. I couldn't believe she was putting a job ahead of my family's well-being. My second experience was when I worked in a bakery. It was my first day, and I was assigned to grease up baking trays for the others to fill. When I lifted up my first tray, 10 to 15 cockroaches scattered everywhere. I told the guy who was showing me the work, but he just shrugged it off. This was all in the back of the store with customers just 10 feet away. After about an hour of doing that, I started to feel sick. I went to the bathroom and then told the guy I couldn't do the job. He told me to get a real job then, so I left. I didn't report them at the time, but I told my mom. She didn't believe me and thought I was making a big deal out of nothing. Turns out, a month later, an inspector closed the place down because of how filthy it was. These businesses are so obsessed with profit. They don't even care about family and sanitation. It's like they're low-key begging for Skynet to rise up and take over so they can replace all of us with robots. Story 11. I was interviewing for a contract position at a tiny game development company. They said they needed help finishing up an existing project. When I saw the game, I was shocked. It looked like it had been made in Microsoft Paint. It was clear that they hired someone with no experience to create art. Granted, it was a mobile game and only cost 99 cents, but it still didn't look engaging at all. I figured that the worst that could happen was that I would make some easy money. Then they told me that my pay would be a percentage of the sales. I immediately knew that I didn't want to work for them. Story 12. I was between jobs and receiving financial support, but I was pretty well qualified. I got an interview with a small company, and I was looking forward to earning some money again. The boss/interviewer was a dirtbag. At one point, he asked me if I felt guilty that people like him were supporting me. I politely told him that he would have to support me a bit longer while I found a suitable job, and then ended the interview and thanked him for his time. Later that day, I went for a trial shift with a door-to-door sales company. The guy I was partnered up with told me that if he didn't make above the target sales, he would only make the equivalent of £3 per hour, which is well below minimum wage in UK. This was a commission-only self-employed role. I noped all the way home that day. Story 13. I work as a nanny now, but when I first got into childcare, I was just babysitting. I was in high school then, and I was babysitting for this one family for the first time. Everything was going well until the parents came home very drunk. They asked me to stay for a little while after they got back, which was weird. Then they offered me a drink. Feeling pressured, I took it and sipped on it. The mom then got really close to me and said that I probably shouldn't be driving home after having a drink. Again, feeling pressured, I was considering accepting her offer, so I asked if I would just be sleeping on the couch. I'll never forget her next words. "Oh no, honey, you'll be going to bed with us." I noped out of there so fast. I think I ran to my car, but it was all a panicked blur. I even left my purse there. Gotta nope out of creepy situations like that and run as fast as Sonic. Story 14. I used to work as a cold caller, calling people about injury claims. I would ask them if they had been injured in the past 3 years. The thing that really bothered me was that all of the people I called in those 20 minutes were polite and said they weren't interested, even though they were just sitting down for dinner. I like the following dialogue in response to these calls. Them. Hi, I've heard you may have been in a car accident in the past 3 years. That wasn't your fault. Me. Nah, I was drunk going 70 in a school zone. Totally my fault. Thanks for the concern though. This usually results in a stunned response, and I've gotten fewer calls since I started doing it. I guess I'm coming off those databases one by one. I realized that it was a horrible job, and that I was not cut out for it. I left after 20 minutes and just walked out the door without a word. Story 15. I went to my orientation at Boot Factory. They're government contracted, so they pay minimum wage. I figured I'd work there for a while and look for something better. After we did the usual paperwork signing, we were taken as a group onto the factory floor for a tour. It was hot, crowded, and smelly, and everyone working looked annoyed by our presence. Okay, I guess not everyone loves their job, right? No big deal. I'm sure this won't be so bad. Then our guide informed us, in no uncertain terms, that our coworkers quite often give new people bad information to get them in trouble or make them mess up. They'd even be the ones to rat you out. Then we were told that our foreman is the type to yell for no reason, ask people if they're drunk in an accusatory way for no reason, and is generally a jerk. I took a few moments to think after these last revelations, said nope, and walked out of the building without a word to anyone. Nonsense, Captain. I'm not putting up with all of that for $8 and some change an hour. If they're admitting to unprofessionalism at the orientation, that's not a red flag. It's a car crash waiting to happen. So I dodged a semi there. Story 16. I had a job at a salad plant, making those bags of salad mix that a lot of restaurants use. I was there for 2 weeks, coring lettuce. All day, I stood in front of a conveyor belt, picking up lettuce heads, slamming them down, pulling the cores out, putting them down, and repeating the process. It was either talking to my coworkers or plotting the downfall of Western civilization. One really sweet lady had been there for 10 years. 10 years on the lettuce line. One day, she got called into the office and was gone for about a half hour. When she came back, she said, "I won't be here tomorrow. I got promoted." I asked her what she'd be doing. Cabbage. I didn't quit right away, but I couldn't help but think about how I didn't want to spend the next 10 years coring lettuce, so I dropped my stuff and walked out. I feel bad about not giving notice, but I was young and, well, 10 years! That was 28 years ago. Had I stayed, I might be up to carrots by now. I sometimes wonder how my life might have been different had I stayed. But in those moments, I remind myself to celebrate every decision I've ever made. When I say I walked out, I mean I really walked out. I didn't formally tell anyone I was leaving, and I provided no notice. I've never left any other job this way. Next, I had an interview at a local pizza place in a not-so-great part of town. I got the job. But as I was walking out, 2 guys came in and robbed the place. The manager gave them the money in the register and they ran out. I looked at him and he said, "You get used to it." I never went back. Nope. Even if they promote me as the chief operating officer of coring the lettuce, I won't take that job. Story 17. I was hired as an intern manager for a local nonprofit recycling plant. My job was to hire and train interns for this amazing work opportunity. However, it turned out that the organization's definition of an intern was someone who worked for free and did everything from event planning and marketing to cleaning the bathroom and taking out the trash. That's basically slave labor, which is illegal. I was on contract for a minimum of 6 months, but I managed to get out of it after 2. I wasn't going to risk my career for their shady business practices. While it is legal for nonprofits to have unpaid interns and give them a level of responsibility, this place had no marketing or event planning staff and relied on interns to do those jobs at a professional level. The CEO was constantly hounding us that the interns, who had no experience or training, weren't producing the same quality of work as someone who had been in the industry for several years. This enters a gray area where even a nonprofit may not be protected. Story 18. I wanted something part-time when I was at uni. I applied for a job at the local cinema chain and got an interview. It was one of those high turnover places where if you got an interview, there was a 95% chance you'd get the job. The guy in the box office radioed his manager and was told to take me to room 7. We went to room 7 and waited, and waited, and waited. About 25 minutes passed before the manager started screaming like crazy over the radio because we weren't in room 2. So we went to room 2, on the other side of the building. 15-screen cinema. The manager started trying to turn on the charm, but I basically said that if that's how he treats his employees in front of a job candidate, there's no way I'm ever working for him. And I asked the other guy to show me out. I'm sure it made no difference to his behavior, but it saved me a lot of potential exploitation. Story 19. I once saw a Craigslist ad for a stereo salesman. I showed up at a warehouse and met a bunch of guys who got into a minivan. The owner told me to go on a ride with them and see how it was, and then we could talk about the job. Turns out all these guys did was lie and cheat. They would go up to strangers and say something like, "Hey man, my cousin got this stereo, but he got arrested and I don't need it. It's worth $500, but I'll gladly sell it to you for $200. Then they would use pushy tactics to get people to go to the ATM and give them money. The stereo was a piece of junk, off-brand, and I overheard the owner saying it cost him only $20 to buy in bulk. Yeah, I noped out of this one pretty quickly. I also called the police. This was in 2010. Story 20. On my second day at Route 21, the managers and other coworkers all went out to lunch together, leaving me alone in the store. I couldn't ring up people yet, and the store was packed, so I felt overwhelmed and unsupported, so I just walked out. I was unemployed for a couple of months after that, and I started applying for any job I could do. One of the jobs I applied for was a basic small business IT support contractor job. When the interviewer introduced me to one of the employees, the employee mouthed, "Run," when the interviewer turned his back. I took the employee's advice and didn't accept the job offer. I'm glad I did because I found a much better job at a different company. Hey, maybe that employee was having a fever dream and some camera flash woke them up. I remembered that one scene in a horror movie where the guy said, "Get out." Hey, if you're still watching, you're in for a wild ride. Stay tuned for what's the most cringe reply all you've seen at the office. Story 5 was nuts. See you there.